So the answer to the where am I from question is there's a long and a short version. So I'll give you the condensed long version. So 15 years ago, when my children were small, I had a plan that when they were off to college, originally I was going to move out of the country, but I was going to travel full time because I've been a travel and feature writer for 25 years. And I blinked and it was 12 years. I blinked and it was 10. I blinked and it was 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So when my older son, who he's now a junior at Vanderbilt University, when he graduated from high school, I sold the house and my younger son and I downsized into a smaller 2-bedroom apartments in his same school district so he could finish school. And then when my younger one graduated, which was last May, I sold everything then. And so as of August 24th, I have no home. I have an 8x10 storage space in Kansas City, and everything else is in my car. So you might have seen that big car packed outside. There's a rocket box on the top, which one of my friends calls an attic, and then I have a big cargo box in the back, so I call that one the basement, and my bike is on there. And so for about past 10 weeks, I've been on the road. And so I just go where I'm doing travel writing or where I'm doing motivational speaking or workshops. So that's the answer to where do I live is everywhere. It's basically everywhere. So I'm very honored to be with you all here. I met Reverend Jill last year and just totally fell in love with her, and she had such wonderful things to say about this community. I love your building. I love every way it's set up. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So I'm really excited to be here. So the title of my talk is, That's My Story, and I'm Willing to Give It Up. So we all have a story, that collection of experiences we've had in our lives. Some of them are positive, and some leave a lot to be desired. But what we often do is latch on to the challenging ones, making them the central narrative through which we filter future and current events. So I've got 2 examples to share with you. This is me at about 6 months old. And as you can see, I had big brown eyes and slicked down jet black hair, and I was just smiling all the time, and life was just wonderful. My mother used to tell me stories about when I was a toddler, and she'd take me out in the stroller, and she'd double strap me in because she was afraid I was going to fall out because I was always jumping up and down and waving and trying to talk to everybody. And when I look at that picture, I see that there was this vibrant life that oozed from every pore of my body. And I'm sure that I thought that everything in life, whatever life was at that point to me, was wonderful. I was held, and I was clothed, and I was bathed, and people oohed and awed all over me, and life was just great. But as I started growing up, things started to change. Suddenly, the messages I was getting from the people around me weren't quite as rosy, and just being myself became a challenge. Suddenly, a lot of people had a lot of other things to say. Now, whether you're a boy or a girl, some of these things may sound familiar to you. You're not smart enough, or you're too smart for your own good. You're not black, Hispanic, gay, straight, whatever, enough. You're too tall or you're too short. You're too fat or you're too thin. You're too young or you're too old. You don't make enough money, or you make too much money. Your faith is wrong, or you need to hold certain beliefs. You really need to drive this car. You should wear these clothes. You don't remember where you came from. Or maybe you need to live somewhere else, or live in a different manner. And that list goes on and on and on and on. We're steeped in that. Turn on the TV for 5 minutes, and you'll hear all of that. And these supposed guidelines for living can be difficult burdens to bear. So here's another story for you. On most days when the weather is nice, I like to ride my bike to the gym. And where I was living before, it was easy, 2 miles, it was flat, could leave the car at home. It's a great way to get exercise. And I always go the same way. So I have been thinking for a while about changing it up a bit just to do something different. So on Tuesday, July 18th, 2017, I left my house, Went up the street to the corner, and that's where I always turn right. So I decided, let's make today the day, let's go a different way. So I decided to go straight. I crossed over the street, and I was riding downhill, not particularly fast, totally aware of my surroundings, and when I looked ahead, I saw what looked like rocks and gravel strewn across the sidewalk. And in my attempts to avoid the rocks and gravel, I realized afterwards that I overcorrected by squeezing both brakes. The bike screeched to a halt, the back wheel reared up, and all I heard myself say was, and then everything went white. And just like in the movies, when they want to show someone maybe having a flashback or an out-of-body experience, everything, like I said, went white. When the whiteness disappeared and life came back into view, I found myself on the ground on all fours with most of my weight on this arm. And due to the intense pain, it took me about 10 seconds to realize that I'd probably broken my arm. To this day, I don't remember anything that happened in between the white. The only evidence I had that I had obviously gone over the handlebars and rolled was that my bike and my backpack were up on the sidewalk in front of me. I had road rash all over my body, and when I looked back on my helmet later, I could see the scratches where my head had obviously hit the ground. Fortunately, I could reach my backpack with my right hand, got my cell phone, and called a friend of mine who lived about 2 blocks away to ask her if she could come and help me. So while I'm laying there on the ground in pain, the first thing that came to my mind was, Lysa, say your gratitude list. So I just started talking out loud, everything that I could think of. I'm grateful that I'm on the sidewalk and not in the street. It is daytime and not night. It's a sunny day and not raining. I'm only 2 miles from the hospital. I have health insurance. My friend who's coming to get me, she'll know exactly what to do. And the biggest thing on that gratitude list, God is here. A man jogging by, my friend that I had called, and some people who were driving down the street and saw me on the ground all stopped right around the same time, and they called 911. So after the police came and the paramedics came, they put me on a stretcher into the ambulance for the ride to the hospital. So while we're on the way to the hospital, I asked the very cute, I might add, EMTs, I hadn't hit my head that hard that I missed that, if they would say my gratitude list with me. And one of them said, well, what's a gratitude list? And I said, it's all the things I have to be thankful for, even while this is happening to me right now. So they jumped right in and repeated the list with me. So as I got to the hospital, to the emergency room, I got the distressing news that I had actually broken my left elbow. And I will spare you the gory details on what fortunately was going on out here that I couldn't really see. But I had to have surgery, and right away. So as you might imagine, once I got home, all drugged up, my arm wrapped from my wrist all the way to my shoulder, that gratitude list was nowhere to be found. And to top it all off, many of the abilities that I had, that I now realize I took for granted, were taken away, even if only temporarily. Cooking, driving, opening the toothpaste, brushing my hair, changing my clothes, tying my shoes were all a challenge. Being grateful for what I could do got totally lost in the shuffle. In the early days of my recovery, what I realized I was really suffering from was an overwhelming feeling of worthlessness. And what I was telling myself about those breaks in my arm was, see, you can't do anything right. Why did you have to go a different way to the gym? The other way was working just fine. You always make bad decisions. These problems you're having, they're all your fault. Once again, I was tying my current circumstances to those old stories, what other people had said about me. Like I said earlier, we all have a story, that collection of experiences that we've had in our lives. But once we can separate the truth behind those stories and what's our error thinking, then we have something to work with to chart a new conscious path for the future. All of that noise, all of that you can't do this, you can't do that, you made bad decisions, that is really your inner critic sitting on your shoulder and repeating them to you over and over and over. In the book Radical Forgiveness by Colin Tipping, he talks about something that he calls a forgiveness centrifuge. And you can equate that to something maybe like a juicer or a plasma machine, where you put something in, spin it around, and it separates the different parts. And the forgiveness centrifuge, Colin Tipping says, we can use to separate the facts of what happened in our lives from our interpretation of the facts. So for example, your fact may have been that as a child, your father left the family. But your interpretation was that it was because of you, that you were bad or wrong, or you should have done something or not done something, and you created this abandonment story that it was around you. Your fact may have been that you had a career goal, but maybe someone said it was beneath you, or that boys or girls can't or shouldn't be that. And your interpretation might have been that your ideas are stupid, or that you need to ask other people what you should do and not think for yourself. Or maybe even, who am I to have a dream in the first place? And those error thinking thoughts also work in the same way by what by all accounts might be considered a positive situation. So I have a friend who said that growing up, she was nothing but supported. Her parents told her what a good girl she was, and she was smart, and she was resourceful, and she played well with others. Nothing but positive input, she says. Those were her facts. Her interpretation of the facts were, with all of those accolades, she had no room for error. If she messed up, people would see that she was really a failure and didn't have it all together. The willingness to give up our old stories is not about spiritual bypassing or looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, but knowing that we have the power to reframe our old stories. So I have 5 steps for you to help you do just that, to separate the facts of what happened in our lives and our interpretation and chart a new conscious path for the future. So here we go. Step number 1, stop and take a deep breath. Stop and take a deep breath. Let's all do that together. When you do that, your shoulders go back a little bit, your chest opens just a little. It creates at least a little bit of space for maybe something else to come in besides that fear story. Step number 2, thank the story for getting your attention. Thank that old story for getting your attention. Whatever it is, it's trying to tell you something. Step number 3, examine the story. Is that story you're telling yourself absolutely true? How is it true? Why is it true? Could there be any other interpretation? Do the people who know and love you the most believe that story too? If you're having trouble answering any of those questions, most likely it's your ego, your inner critic, that's doing the talking for you. Step number 4, reframe the old story. What is the opposite of that story? Or how do you want to feel without the burden of that story? Or what if you choose not to believe that story at all this time? And step number 5, be gentle with yourself. You're changing negative patterns of thought that have been deeply rooted in your subconscious mind, sometimes for years, and it takes time. Beating yourself up for still having that old story is like going to the gym one time and expecting your body to look exactly the way you want it to. But it doesn't work that way. We have to practice. That's why it's called a spiritual practice. We're just putting one story in that forgiveness centrifuge at a time, spinning it up, and separating the facts from our interpretation of the facts. So this is my new arm. I call it my new bionic arm. And you can see where they put the pins in to stabilize the bones, and then there's a plate down there at the bottom. So what I say now about those breaks in my arm, those old stories, is this. I am adventuresome and like to try new things. I am capable and smart. My vulnerability is one of my strengths. My friends and family love me not for what I can do, but for who I am. I am grateful for all the lessons and blessings in that old story. And at that plate holding it together, I tell myself, I am worthy and I love myself just the way I am. And to that cute little girl, my older, wiser self says, you are a perfect expression of God. You always have been, and you always will be. Those other things were your old story, but it's time to give them up. You just need to believe in yourself because you are far more than you know. So I have an affirmation I'd like to share with you, and I'll say it once, and maybe we could say it together. I have the power to reframe my old stories and chart a new conscious path for the future. Let's say that together. I have the power to reframe my old stories and chart a new conscious path for the future. Thank you, and namaste.